Hercule Poirot, The Final Hour, Full Mystery. Audiobook, welcome to the Poirot archives. Tonight we journey through fog-shrouded moors to the ancient halls of Blackmoor, where shadows hold secrets, and time itself becomes a weapon of murder. Hercule Poirot, the legendary Belgian detective, receives a desperate summons in the dead of night. A wealthy lord fears for his life, but will Poirot arrive in time, or has the final hour already struck? Join us for The Final Hour, a tale of inheritance, betrayal, and the deadly precision of a killer who understood that in murder, timing is everything. This mystery is crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this enigma unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Midnight Summons. The telegram arrived at 10:30 on an evening when London had wrapped itself in a particularly unpleasant November fog. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had been enjoying a quiet evening at Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions, where a cheerful fire crackled against the damp chill seeping through the windows. My friend sat in his customary chair, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the firelight, engaged in what he considered the most civilized of evening pursuits, arranging his collection of newspaper clippings into geometrically precise piles. "The symmetry, Hastings," Poirot murmured, adjusting a cutting by a fraction of an inch. "It soothes the little grey cells, this order amidst chaos." I had just opened my mouth to suggest a nightcap when the sharp rap came at the door. George, Poirot's impeccable valet, appeared moments later bearing a silver tray, upon which lay a telegram, its envelope bearing the unmistakable red stripe of urgent delivery. Poirot's eyebrows rose as he took the envelope, slicing it open with the precision of a surgeon. I watched his face as he read, noting how his expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching grave concern. "What is it, Poirot?" He passed me the telegram without comment. The message was brief, the handwriting of the telegraph operator slightly uneven, perhaps reflecting the urgency with which it had been dispatched. "Poirot, stop, fear for my life. Stop will be murdered before midnight. Stop, come at once to Blackmoor Hall. Devonshire, stop car. Waiting Exeter Station, stop. Lord Edmund Ashworth." "Good heavens," I exclaimed. "Murdered before midnight. The man sounds rather certain of his fate." "Indeed, mon ami." Poirot rose from his chair, his small frame suddenly animated with purpose. And when a man of Lord Ashworth's reputation, for he is not a man given to fancy or exaggeration, makes such a claim, Hercule Poirot does not dismiss it as the ravings of a nervous disposition. "You know of him?" "Lord Edmund Ashworth," Poirot said, already moving toward his bedroom to prepare for departure, "is one of the wealthiest men in the West Country. Coal mines, shipping interests, railway investments. A self-made fortune built upon the foundations of a very old name. He is also, by all accounts, a man with more enemies than friends." Within the hour, we found ourselves aboard the last train to Exeter, the fog-bound streets of London giving way to the rushing darkness of the English countryside. The carriage was nearly empty at this late hour, and Poirot sat opposite me, his eyes closed, though I knew better than to assume he slept. "You are troubled, Poirot," I observed. One eye opened, fixing me with that peculiarly intense gaze. "The timing, Hastings. Consider the timing. Lord Ashworth does not merely fear death. He fears death before midnight. This specificity, it suggests he knows something. Something precise. Something connected to that hour. Perhaps a deadline of some sort. A business arrangement. Perhaps. Poirot's mustache twitched. Or perhaps something more personal. We shall see, mon ami. We shall see. The train deposited us at Exeter Station well past 11 o'clock, where, true to Lord Ashworth's word, a motor car waited. The driver, a grim-faced man in a chauffeur's uniform who introduced himself as Barnett, said little as we climbed aboard. His silence struck me as that of a man burdened by worry, or perhaps fear. "Barnett," Poirot said as we set off into the night. "How long have you been in Lord Ashworth's employ?" 15 years, sir." The man's eyes never left the road ahead, barely visible through the fog that had followed us from London, since before he became Lord Ashworth, when he was just Mr. Edmund making his way in the world. "And in 15 years have you known your master to be a man given to irrational fears?" A pause. The engine hummed. Then, "No, sir. His lordship is the most rational man I've ever known. Cold, some would say. Calculating. If he says he'll be murdered before midnight, then—" Barnett did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The drive to Blackmore Hall took nearly an hour, the road winding through increasingly desolate moorland. The fogs grew thicker as we climbed, until the motor car's headlamps illuminated nothing but swirling grey, mere feet ahead. I found myself checking my pocket watch repeatedly, watching the minutes tick past 11, then 12:30, then 11:45. "We shall be too late," I muttered. "Perhaps," Poirot said calmly. "Or perhaps we shall arrive precisely when we are meant to." I had no idea what he meant by this cryptic remark, but before I could inquire, the motor car crested a rise, and Blackmore Hall emerged from the fog like a spectre. It was an ancient pile, part medieval fortress, part Georgian manor, the various additions and renovations of centuries, creating an architectural hodgepodge that nonetheless possessed a certain brooding grandeur. Ivy crawled up its stone walls, and what windows were, illuminated, cast pale yellow rectangles into the swirling mist. A great clock tower rose from the eastern wing, its face glowing faintly, though from this distance I could not read the time. As we pulled into the circular drive, I noticed several other motor cars already present. Barnett brought us to a halt before the great oak doors, which stood open, spilling light and the sound of raised voices into the night. "Something has happened," Poirot murmured. We mounted the steps quickly, entering a grand entrance hall where chaos reigned. Servants rushed about with no apparent purpose. A woman, I would later learn, was Lady Ashworth, sat weeping on a settee, and a young man with the look of the family stood arguing furiously with a distinguished gentleman in evening dress. "Told you we should have called the police immediately, not some foreign detective. Gerald, please." It was then that a stout, red-faced man in country tweeds spotted us and hurried over, his hand extended in greeting, or perhaps supplication. "Monsieur Poirot, thank God you've come. I'm Dr. Malcolm Reeves. I've been the family physician for 20 years. I'm terribly afraid you've arrived too late." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "Lord Ashworth." Dr. Reeves nodded, his jowls quivering. "Dead. Found in his study not 20 minutes ago. The door was locked from the inside. We had to break it down." "The time of discovery?" Poirot asked. "Approximately 10 minutes past 11. I saw Poirot's eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. "And the study clock? What time did it show?" Dr. Reeves blinked at this peculiar question. I'm not certain. Does it matter?" "Everything matters, Doctor. Précisément everything." Poirot surveyed the cast of the entrance hall, then turned back to Dr. Reeves. Take me to the body. Touch nothing. Let no one leave this house. And someone, his voice rose, commanding attention from the scattered household. Someone must tell me what was to happen at midnight. The weeping Lady Ashworth looked up, her face streaked with tears. His will, she whispered. Edmund was to sign a new will at midnight. He'd summoned his solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, specifically for that purpose. A new will, Poirot repeated softly. And this new will, it was to change the distribution of his fortune. Lady Ashworth nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. He was going to disinherit Gerald, our eldest son. Leave everything to his new wife's children from her first marriage. New wife, I interjected, confused. But you are... His first wife, Lady Ashworth said bitterly. We divorced 3 years ago. Edmund remarried 18 months past. That woman, she gestured toward the staircase, where I now noticed a younger woman descending, her face pale but composed, is the current Lady Ashworth, Diana. The younger woman, Diana, reached the bottom of the stairs. She was perhaps 35, strikingly beautiful in a cold, sculptural way, with dark hair swept up elegantly, and eyes the colour of a winter sea. She wore an evening gown of midnight blue, and her composure amidst the household's distress was remarkable. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady. My husband sent for you. I am glad you have come, though it seems we are beyond help now. Madame, Poirot inclined his head, you say we are beyond help. You do not say your husband is beyond help. A curious distinction. Something flickered in those grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being caught in an imprecision. A figure of speech, surely. Perhaps, and perhaps not. Poirot turned to Dr. Reeves. The study, if you please. And I shall require a list of every person in this house tonight, and their whereabouts at the time of death. As we followed the doctor through the grand hallway, passing beneath portraits of Ashworths stretching back centuries, I whispered to Poirot, You suspect foul play already? I suspect everything, Hastings. A man fears murder before midnight. He is found dead at 11. Either his fear was premature, or someone ensured he would not live to see the hour he dreaded. Poirot paused before the door to the study, which hung askew from the violence of its forced entry. The question is not merely who killed Lord Ashworth. The question is when, and why the hour mattered so very much. The clock tower outside began to chime. I counted the strokes. 12, midnight had come, and Lord Ashworth's final hour had already passed. Chapter 2, Death at the 11th hour. The study of Lord Edmund Ashworth was a room designed to intimidate. Dark oak panelling rose to a ceiling painted with classical scenes of commerce and conquest. Prometheus bringing fire, Midas counting gold. Heavy velvet curtains of burgundy blocked the windows, and a fire had burned low in the massive stone fireplace, casting the room in a dim reddish glow. But it was the figure slumped at the great mahogany desk that commanded attention. Lord Ashworth sat in his leather chair, his body pitched forward, one hand stretched toward a crystal decanter of brandy, the other clutching at his chest. His face, in the flickering firelight, wore an expression of profound surprise, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, frozen in the moment of his death. He was a large man, powerfully built despite his 68 years, with a thick grey beard and heavy brows that even in death seemed to scowl at the world. Poirot approached the body with the reverence and precision of a priest approaching the altar. His keen eyes swept the scene. cataloguing every detail while his hands remained clasped behind his back. "The door," he said softly. "It was locked from within, you say?" Dr. Reeves nodded, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "The key was in the lock on the inside. We had to break the door down, Barnett and Gerald together." "And the windows?" "Latched from within as well. I checked them myself when we entered." Poirot moved to the nearest window, examining the latch with care. He then turned his attention to the fireplace, peering up into the chimney before returning to the desk. "A locked room," I murmured. "Then surely it must be suicide, Poirot. Or natural causes." "Natural causes, perhaps, if one considers poison to be natural." Poirot leaned close to the dead man's face, sniffing delicately. His moustache twitched. "You smell it, Hastings. Beneath the brandy, beneath the wood smoke, a faint bitterness. Almonds. Prussic acid?" Dr. Reeves stepped forward, alarmed. "But that's cyanide, doctor, or something very like it." Poirot straightened, his expression grave. "This man was murdered. The locked room, it is theatre, designed to suggest suicide or accident. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily deceived." I examined the desktop while Poirot continued his investigation. The surface was cluttered with papers, legal documents, correspondence, financial statements. The crystal decanter of brandy stood near Lord Ashworth's outstretched hand, and beside it, a single glass, half empty. A small silver tray held a plate of biscuits, untouched. "The brandy," I said. "The poison was in the brandy?" "So it would appear, mon ami. And yet—" Poirot trailed off, his attention caught by something on the mantelpiece. He crossed to the fireplace with quick, precise steps and stood before a handsome carriage clock that occupied the place of honor above the flames. "Dr. Reeves, you said the body was discovered at approximately 10 minutes past 11. That's correct. And yet this clock shows the time as 11 o'clock precisely. It has stopped." Dr. Reeves shrugged. "The mechanism must have failed. These old clocks." Perhaps. Poirot lifted the clock with care, turning it over in his hands. "Or perhaps someone wished us to believe that 11 o'clock was the significant hour. Tell me, doctor, in your professional opinion, how long had Lord Ashworth been dead when you examined the body?" The physician hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Difficult to say precisely. The room was warm from the fire, which would affect the usual indicators. But I would estimate at least an hour, perhaps more." "At least an hour." Poirot set the clock down with exaggerated care. "So if the body was discovered at 11:10 and he had been dead for an hour, then Lord Ashworth died not at 11, but at 10 o'clock, perhaps even earlier." "But that's impossible," I protested. "Gerald was arguing with his father at 9:30. Several people heard them." "Précisément, Hastings." Poirot's eyes glittered in the firelight. "Several people heard them. But did anyone see Lord Ashworth alive after that argument?" A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the November fog pressing against the windows. Poirot turned to Dr. Reeves. "I shall require a detailed account of everyone's movements this evening. But first, who discovered the body, and what were the exact circumstances?" "It was the butler, Harrington," Dr. Reeves replied. "Lord Ashworth had given strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed in his study until midnight, when Mr. Pemberton, his solicitor, was to be admitted for the signing of the new will. But at 11 o'clock, Harrington heard what he described as a crash from within the study. He knocked, received no answer, and became concerned. He attempted to enter. Yes, but the door was locked. He called for help. Gerald and Barnett came running, and together they broke down the door. I was summoned immediately. I had been staying in the house for the evening at Lord Ashworth's request, in case my services were needed. His lordship was expecting trouble then. Dr. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. He was anxious. He'd been complaining of chest pains for several weeks. I'd examined him just yesterday and found nothing seriously wrong, but Edmund, Lord Ashworth, was convinced he was in danger. That's why he sent for you, I imagine. And yet, Poirot murmured, he feared murder, not heart failure. A significant distinction. He gestured toward the door. I should like to speak with Harrington, and then, I think, with each member of the household in turn. But first, where is Mr. Pemberton, the solicitor? In the drawing-room with the others. He arrived at 10:30 to prepare the documents. And the new will itself, where is it? Dr. Reeves pointed to the desk. There, I believe. Lord Ashworth had the documents ready for signing. Poirot returned to the desk, careful not to disturb the body, and examined the papers. After a moment, he held up a thick document bound in blue paper, the new will unsigned, and beside it, he lifted a second document, older and more worn. The current will, dated 3 years past. He scanned the pages quickly, his eyebrows rising. Most illuminating. What does it say? I asked. The current will divides the estate between Lord Ashworth's 3 children from his first marriage. Gerald, the eldest son, Thomas, the younger son, and Beatrice, the daughter. Gerald receives the title and the hall itself, but the liquid fortune is divided equally among the 3. And the new will. Poirot set the document down carefully. The new will leaves everything. The hall, the title, the entire fortune, to Diana, the current Lady Ashworth, to be held in trust for her 2 children from her previous marriage. Gerald, Thomas, and Beatrice are disinherited entirely, save for a token bequest of £100 each. I let out a low whistle. That would give Gerald a powerful motive for murder. Indeed, Hastings. Gerald, who was heard arguing violently with his father at 9:30. Gerald, who helped break down the door. Gerald, who would lose everything if that new will were signed. Poirot paused. Almost too powerful a motive, would you not say? Before I could respond, a commotion arose in the hallway. Raised voices, a woman's sharp cry, and then the sound of running feet. We emerged from the study to find Gerald Ashworth, a tall, dark-haired man of perhaps 35, with his father's heavy brows and a distinctly choleric complexion, struggling against the restraining arms of Barnett, the chauffeur. Let me go, damn you. I won't be treated like a common criminal in my own home. Gerald, the first Lady Ashworth rushed forward, grasping her son's arm. Please, darling, you're making things worse. Worse? How could they possibly be worse, mother? Gerald's eyes blazed as they fixed upon Poirot. And you're the detective father summoned, aren't you? Well, you're too late. He's dead. And I suppose you'll try to pin it on me because I'm the convenient suspect. Mr. Ashworth. Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. I pin nothing on anyone. I seek only the truth. And the truth, it does not care for convenience. It cares only for facts. Facts? Gerald laughed bitterly. Then here are your facts. Yes, I argued with my father tonight. Yes, I was furious about the new will. I called him every name I could think of and told him he'd regret cutting us out. But I didn't kill him. When I left that study at 9:45, he was very much alive. Alive and threatening to have me thrown out of the house before midnight. You left the study at 9:45. Poirot repeated. And then I went to my room to pack. I assumed I'd be leaving in the morning, one way or another. Ask anyone. The maid, Daisy, brought me a whiskey at 10 o'clock, and I was in my room when she arrived. And you remained there. Gerald's expression flickered. Until I heard Harrington shouting about the door. That was around 11, I think. I came down immediately. You heard Harrington shouting, Poirot said thoughtfully, but you did not hear the crash that Harrington described? No, my room is in the east wing above the study. If there was a crash, I didn't hear it. Curious. Poirot turned to survey the assembled household, who had gathered in the hallway like mourners at a funeral. His gaze moved from face to face, Lady Ashworth pale and trembling, Diana cool and watchful, Gerald flushed with anger, and others I had not yet been introduced to. I shall require the use of a room for my interviews, Poirot announced. The library, perhaps, if it is available. I shall speak with each of you in turn, beginning with Harrington. Until then, no one is to leave this house, and no one, his eyes swept the group with sudden sharpness, is to enter the study or touch anything therein. The police will be summoned at dawn, but until they arrive, this investigation is mine. And who gave you the authority? Gerald began, but his mother silenced him with a sharp look. Lord Ashworth summoned Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly. That authority comes from the dead man himself. I, for one, wish to know who killed Edmund. Despite our differences, he was the father of my children. A sentiment I share, Diana said, her voice smooth as silk. Please, Monsieur Poirot, do whatever you must. I want justice for my husband. Poirot inclined his head. Justice, madame, is precisely what I intend to deliver. The truth, it will emerge, as it always does. And when it does, the killer will find that the final hour they so carefully orchestrated has become their own. He turned on his heel and walked toward the library, pausing only to murmur to me as I fell into step beside him. The clock, Hastings. Remember the clock. It stopped at 11, but the man was already dead. Someone wished us to believe in that hour, and that someone made a mistake. What mistake? Poirot smiled, but there was no warmth in it. They assumed Hercule Poirot would not be here to notice. Chapter 3. The Broken Timepiece. The library of Blackmore Hall was a more welcoming space than the study, though it shared the same oppressive weight of generations. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, their leather-bound volumes arranged with military precision. A fire had been lit in the grate, and heavy curtains of forest green blocked out the fog-shrouded night. Poirot positioned himself in a wing-back chair near the fire, while I took up residence at a small writing desk, notebook at the ready. Harrington, the butler, was a man of perhaps 60 years, tall, thin, and possessed of that peculiar dignity that seems bred into English servants of a certain caliber. His silver hair was immaculately combed, his livery spotless despite the evening's disturbances, and his hands, I noted, were perfectly steady. Please, sit. Poirot gestured to the chair opposite him. I understand this has been a most distressing evening. Indeed, sir. Harrington lowered himself into the chair with the careful precision of a man unused to sitting in the presence of his betters. 32 years I have served this family. First the old Lord Ashworth, Edmund's father, and then Edmund himself. To see him taken in such a manner. You were fond of your master? Harrington considered the question carefully. I respected him, sir. Lord Ashworth was not an easy man to like. He was demanding, often harsh, and his temper could be formidable. But he was fair in his own way, and he rewarded loyalty. And yet, Poirot said softly, tonight he was to sign a will that would cast his own children into poverty. Does this seem fair to you? Something flickered behind the butler's impassive expression. It is not my place to comment on his lordship's decisions regarding his estate. But you have opinions, no? A man does not serve a family for 32 years without forming opinions. Harrington was silent for a long moment. Then, with careful deliberation, the new Lady Ashworth has been a disruptive influence. Since her arrival there has been discord where once there was, if not harmony, at least stability. You do not care for her. I did not say that, sir. You did not need to. Poirot smiled briefly, then shifted in his chair. Now tell me precisely what occurred this evening. Begin with dinner. Harrington nodded, his composure fully restored. Dinner was served at 8 o'clock in the main dining room. Present were Lord and Lady Ashworth, the current Lady Ashworth, that is, along with Mr. Gerald, Miss Beatrice, Mr. Thomas, the first Lady Ashworth, Dr. Reeves, and Mr. Pemberton, the solicitor, who had arrived early to review the documents. The first Lady Ashworth was also present. I interjected, surprised. Surely that must have been awkward. Extremely, sir. But Lord Ashworth insisted. He wanted all parties present for the reading and signing of the new will at midnight. He was not a man who shied away from confrontation. A dramatic gesture, Poirot murmured. Continue, please. Dinner was tense but uneventful, until approximately 8:30, when Mr. Gerald accused Lady Ashworth, the current Lady Ashworth, of manipulating his father. Words were exchanged. Lord Ashworth ordered Gerald to his study for a private conversation. And this conversation took place when? They retired to the study at approximately 9 o'clock. The raised voices could be heard throughout the ground floor for perhaps 45 minutes. At 9:45, Mr. Gerald emerged, visibly agitated, and went directly upstairs to his room. Did you see Lord Ashworth after Gerald departed? Harrington hesitated, the first crack in his composed facade. No, sir. The study door was closed. Lord Ashworth had given strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed until midnight. So after 9:45, no one saw Lord Ashworth alive. I cannot say for certain, sir. I assumed he was working at his desk, preparing for the signing. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes intent. Now, Harrington, the crash. Tell me about the crash. It was approximately 11:10, sir. I was in the butler's pantry, reviewing the arrangements for the midnight signing, when I heard a tremendous crash from the direction of the study. Glass breaking and a heavy thud, as though something or someone had fallen. You went immediately to investigate? I did, sir. The study door was locked. I knocked and called out, but received no response. I became alarmed and summoned assistance. Who came to your aid? Mr. Gerald was first to arrive. He came down from his room. Then Barnett, who had been in the servants' hall. Together, they forced the door. And what did you find? Harrington's composure finally cracked. His hand, so steady before, trembled slightly. His lordship was slumped over his desk, clearly deceased. The brandy glass had fallen from his hand and shattered on the floor. That was the crash I had heard, the glass breaking. Poirot's eyebrows rose sharply. You are certain? The crash you heard was the brandy glass breaking? I assume so, sir. What else could it have been? What else? Indeed. Poirot rose from his chair and paced before the fire, his small frame casting a dancing shadow on the bookshelves. Our brandy glass, falling from the hand of a dead man, makes a crash, loud enough to be heard in the butler's pantry. And yet Dr. Reeves estimates that Lord Ashworth had been dead for at least an hour when the body was discovered. How does a dead man drop a glass, Harrington? The butler's face went pale. I don't understand, sir. Nor do I. Not yet. Poirot turned back to face him. One more question. The clock in the study, the carriage clock on the mantelpiece, was it functioning normally when you last saw it? I believe so, sir. Lord Ashworth was most particular about that clock. It had belonged to his father. He wound it every morning without fail. And yet tonight, it stopped at precisely 11 o'clock. Most convenient, would you not say? Harrington said nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. Thank you, Harrington. You may go. Please send in Miss Beatrice. Beatrice Ashworth was a woman of perhaps 30, plain-featured but possessed of intelligent grey eyes and an air of quiet capability. Unlike the rest of her family, she seemed more weary than distraught, the exhaustion of someone who had long expected catastrophe and felt almost relieved that it had finally arrived. Miss Ashworth, Poirot began gently, I understand this is a difficult time. You may dispense with the pleasantries, Monsieur Poirot. Beatrice settled into the chair with an unfeminine directness that I found rather refreshing. My father is dead, and I suspect you believe one of us killed him. Ask your questions. Poirot smiled appreciatively. Very well. Where were you this evening between 10 o'clock and 11? In my room, writing letters. I find social gatherings exhausting, and tonight's dinner was more trying than most. I pleaded a headache and retired early, around 9:30, I believe. Can anyone confirm this? The upstairs maid, Agnes, brought me a pot of tea at 10 o'clock. Other than that, I was alone. And you heard nothing unusual. No crash, no raised voices after your brother's argument with your father. Beatrice shook her head. My room is in the west wing on the opposite side of the house from the study. I heard nothing until Gerald came pounding on my door to tell me father was dead. Miss Ashworth, forgive the indelicacy, but were you troubled by the provisions of the new will? For the first time, emotion flickered across her composed features. Troubled. I was furious, Monsieur Poirot. Not for myself. I have modest needs and a small inheritance from my grandmother that would sustain me. But for Gerald and Thomas, who have devoted their lives to this estate, to be cast aside for her children. Her children. You refer to Lady Ashworth's son and daughter from her first marriage. Philip and Margot Crane. 17 and 15 years old, away at school, knowing nothing of any of this, and set to inherit a fortune they have no connection to, no right to. Beatrice's voice hardened. Diana has bewitched my father. There is no other explanation. Bewitched. 3 years ago, my father was a cold but rational man. Then he met Diana at some society function in London, and within 6 months he had divorced my mother, married that woman, and begun the process of systematically erasing his first family from his life. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes burning. She is poison, Monsieur Poirot. Beautiful, deadly poison. A strong accusation. One I stand behind. Beatrice sat back, her moment of passion fading into weariness. But if you're looking for a murderer, I am not your woman. I wanted my father alive, at least until tomorrow. Gerald and Mother and I had engaged a solicitor of our own. We planned to contest the will, claim undue influence. With Father dead before signing, the old will stands. Gerald inherits the hall and the title, and we three split the fortune. We had everything to gain by keeping him alive. And yet, Poirot observed quietly, the new will was not signed. The death occurred at the most advantageous possible moment for your family. Beatrice met his gaze steadily. Convenient for us, yes. But Diana knew about our legal plans. Father told her yesterday. If she realized she might lose everything in a court battle, wouldn't death before the signing be advantageous for her as well? The unsigned will might still be contested. Perhaps she has evidence of Father's intent that we know nothing about. Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. You suggest Lady Ashworth had motive to kill her own husband? I suggest nothing. I merely observe that in this house everyone has secrets, and everyone has something to gain, or lose. Beatrice rose. Is there anything else? One small thing. The clock in your father's study, the carriage clock on the mantelpiece. Did you ever notice your father adjusting it? Or was there any peculiarity about its timekeeping? An odd look crossed Beatrice's face. That clock kept perfect time. Father was obsessive about it. He used to say it was the only honest thing in Blackmore Hall. It never lied, never slowed, never stopped. She paused at the door. If it stopped tonight, Monsieur Poirot, someone stopped it deliberately. And I think you already know that. She departed, leaving the scent of lavender and the weight of her suspicions behind her. Poirot sat in silence for several minutes after Beatrice left, his eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the grate. I waited, knowing better than to interrupt his contemplation. Finally, he spoke. The clock, Hastings. It is the key to everything. How so? Someone stopped it to confuse the time of death. That much seems clear. But why that particular time? Why 11 o'clock? Poirot rose and began to pace. Consider. Lord Ashworth dies, let us say, around 10 o'clock, perhaps even earlier. The killer stages the scene, arranges the body, stops the clock at 11. An hour later, a crash is heard. The door is broken down and the body is discovered. You think the crash was staged as well? It must have been, mon ami. A dead man does not drop a glass an hour after dying. Someone created that crash. A mechanism, perhaps, or an accomplice. The sound was meant to draw attention, to ensure the body was discovered at precisely the right moment. But why? That is what we must determine. Poirot stopped pacing, his expression grave. Someone in this house is very clever, Hastings. They have constructed an elaborate illusion around the time of death. But they have made one critical error. What error? They assume no one would question the clock. Poirot's smile was thin and cold. They did not anticipate that Hercule Poirot would be here to notice that the honest clock had been made to lie. Chapter 4. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. The next witness to enter the library was Thomas Ashworth, the younger son, a man of 32, with the soft hands and distracted air of a scholar. Where Gerald was all fire and choleric temperament, Thomas seemed made of gentler stuff. His fair hair was slightly dishevelled. His spectacles sat crookedly on his nose, and his evening clothes appeared to have been donned with more concern for speed than elegance. Monsieur Poirot, he said, settling into the chair with a nervous flutter of his hands. I'm afraid I shan't be much help. I've rather been keeping to myself this evening. Family gatherings, you understand, tend to bring out the worst in everyone. And yet you were present at dinner? under duress. Thomas attempted a wan smile. Father insisted. He wanted witnesses for his grand theatrical production, the signing of the new will at the stroke of midnight. Very Gothic of him, don't you think? Father always did have a flair for the dramatic. You speak of him with affection. Thomas's smile faded. I speak of him with honesty. Father was a tyrant, Monsieur Poirot. He controlled every aspect of our lives, our careers, our marriages, our finances. Gerald has spent 20 years trying to earn his approval and failing. Beatrice sacrificed a promising academic career to serve as his hostess and social secretary. And I... He trailed off, adjusting his spectacles. And you, Mr. Ashworth? I wanted to be a poet. Thomas laughed bitterly. Can you imagine? The son of Edmund Ashworth, coal magnate and railway baron, scribbling verses in a garret. Father found it hilarious. He gave me a position in the family's shipping office, a position I am spectacularly unsuited for, and made it clear that my allowance depended on my continued attendance. You resented him. I despised him. The words came out flat, without heat. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're wondering. I lack the courage for murder. I lack the courage for most things, really. Poirot studied him with those shrewd eyes. Where were you between 10 o'clock and 11 this evening? In the conservatory at the back of the house. There's a comfortable chair there, behind the palms, where one can hide from family dysfunction and read in peace. I was working through a volume of Baudelaire, in the original French, naturally. Can anyone confirm this? Thomas shook his head. The conservatory is rather isolated. That's rather the point. You heard nothing? Saw nothing? Only the fog pressing against the glass and the distant sounds of the household. No crashes, no screams, no convenient clues. Thomas leaned forward, his expression suddenly intent. But I can tell you something that might be useful, Monsieur Poirot. Something I observed at dinner. Please. Diana, our stepmother. She was nervous. Not obviously so, but I've made rather a study of human behavior. It's useful for poetry, you understand. She kept glancing at the clock, checking her wristwatch, as though she was waiting for something. And at one point, when Father mentioned that you were on your way, she went quite pale. She knew of my arrival. Father announced it at dinner. He said he'd summoned the famous detective to protect him from those who wished him harm. He seemed almost gleeful about it, as though he expected you to catch someone in the act. Thomas paused. Diana excused herself shortly after that announcement. Said she had a headache. She was gone for perhaps 20 minutes. What time was this? Around 8:45, I'd say. Before Gerald's argument with Father. Poirot's moustache twitched, and when she returned, she seemed calmer, more composed, almost satisfied. Thomas rose from his chair. I don't know what any of it means, Monsieur Poirot, but Diana Ashworth is not what she appears to be. I've felt it from the moment she entered this family. There's something cold beneath that beautiful surface, something calculating. You share your sister's suspicions. I share my sister's observations. The conclusions, I leave to you. After Thomas departed, Poirot requested a brief interlude. He stood at the library window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded grounds, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. The pieces, they begin to form a pattern, Hastings, he murmured, but it is not yet complete. There are gaps, crucial gaps. Diana seems the most likely suspect, I offered. She had the most to gain from the new will, and her behavior at dinner was suspicious. Ah, but consider, mon ami, the new will was not signed. If Diana wished to inherit, she needed Lord Ashworth alive until midnight. His death before the signing benefits not her, but the first family. Unless she had some other plan, some way to validate the unsigned will. Possible. Poirot turned from the window. But there is something else troubling me. The locked room. How did the killer escape from a room locked from within? A secret passage, perhaps. These old houses often have them. Perhaps. Or perhaps the room was not locked when the murder occurred. Perhaps the locking came later, as part of the staging. Poirot's eyes glittered. We have been assuming that the locked door proves the killer could not have escaped. But what if the locked door was itself the illusion? Before I could pursue this intriguing line of thought, there was a soft knock at the library door. It opened to reveal Diana Ashworth, resplendent in her midnight blue gown, her composure as flawless as a porcelain mask. Monsieur Poirot, I understand you wish to speak with me. Diana settled into the chair with the grace of a woman accustomed to being watched and admired. Her grey eyes met Poirot's without flinching, and I noticed that her hands, so often a betrayer of nerves, lay perfectly still in her lap. Lady Ashworth, Poirot began, my condolences on your loss. Thank you. Her voice was measured, controlled. Edmund and I had our differences, but I cared for him deeply. This has been a profound shock. No doubt. Tell me, madame, how did you meet Lord Ashworth? If Diana was surprised by the question, she concealed it well. At a charity gala in London, 3 years ago, I was recently widowed. My first husband, Richard Crane, had died of influenza the previous winter. Edmund was attentive, charming in his way. He pursued me with considerable determination. And you succumbed to his charms. A faint smile touched her lips. I succumbed to his security, Monsieur Poirot. I will not pretend otherwise. I was a widow with 2 children and dwindling resources. Edmund offered stability, comfort, a future for Philip and Margot. Is that so terrible? Not terrible, madam. Merely practical. I am a practical woman. Diana's gaze hardened slightly. I know what the family thinks of me, that I am a fortune hunter who bewitched poor Edmund. But the truth is simpler and less romantic. Edmund wanted a young, attractive wife to parade before his business associates. I wanted security for my children. It was an arrangement that suited us both. And the new will? Was that also an arrangement? Diana's composure flickered, just for an instant. The new will was Edmund's idea. He had grown increasingly estranged from his children. Gerald's gambling debts, Beatrice's constant criticism, Thomas's utter uselessness in business matters. He said they had disappointed him for the last time. And your children were to benefit instead. Edmund wished to provide for them, yes. He had grown fond of Philip and Margot during their school holidays here. Diana's voice softened. They reminded him of himself as a young man, he said. Ambitious, eager, untainted by the entitlement that had corrupted his own offspring. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. At dinner this evening, Lord Ashworth announced my impending arrival. I am told you excused yourself shortly afterward. Where did you go? Diana's stillness became absolute, the stillness of a predator sensing danger. I had a headache. I went to my room for a tisane. For 20 minutes, I lay down briefly. The tension at dinner was considerable. And you saw no one during this time? Spoke to no one? My lady's maid, Colette, brought me the tisane. Other than that, no one. What time was this? Around 9 o'clock, I should say. I returned to the dining room just as Gerald was being summoned to father's study. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Lady Ashworth, I must ask you directly. Did you kill your husband? Diana's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something behind the porcelain mask. Not guilt exactly, but something more complex. Fear, perhaps. Or recognition. No, Monsieur Poirot, I did not kill Edmund. Her voice was steady, but her hands, those perfectly still hands, had begun to tremble almost imperceptibly. But I believe I know who did. The silence in the library was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. You know who killed Lord Ashworth? Poirot's voice was soft as silk. This is a remarkable claim, madame. Diana's composure had cracked fully now. She leaned forward, her grey eyes bright with something that might have been fear or might have been triumph. Not no suspect, but my suspicions are strong. She drew a breath. It was Gerald. It must have been Gerald. Your stepson. How convenient. Convenient or not, it is the truth. Gerald hated Edmund. Everyone in this house knows that. He has gambling debts that would make your hair stand on end, Monsieur Poirot. Debts to dangerous men. The inheritance from the old will would clear those debts and leave him a wealthy man. But Gerald has an alibi. The maid, Daisy is in love with him. Diana's voice dripped contempt. She would say anything he asked her to say, and Gerald is charming when he wishes to be. Charming and utterly ruthless. You believe the maid is lying. I believe Gerald has manipulated everyone in this household at one time or another. He manipulated his mother into divorcing Edmund. He manipulated Beatrice into supporting his claim to the estate. And now he has manipulated this situation to cast suspicion anywhere but on himself. Poirot studied her for a long moment. And yet, madame, it is you who cast suspicion. You who points the finger. Some might say this is itself a form of manipulation. Diana's face hardened. Think what you like, Monsieur Poirot. I have told you what I believe. Gerald Ashworth killed his father to prevent the new will from being signed. The locked room, the timing, the theatrical staging, it all bears his mark. He has always been obsessed with this house, with his inheritance, with being Lord Ashworth. Now he has achieved his ambition. I hope it brings him nothing but misery. She rose, smoothing her gown with hands that had steadied themselves through sheer force of will. If there is nothing else, I should like to retire. This has been an exhausting evening. One more question, Lady Ashworth. Poirot's voice stopped her at the door. The carriage clock in your husband's study. Did you ever notice it behaving unusually? Stopping, perhaps, or running fast? Diana frowned, puzzled by the apparent non sequitur. Edmund's clock. No, never. He was devoted to that clock, wound it every morning like a ritual. Why do you ask? Curiosity, madame. Merely curiosity. When she had gone, Poirot turned to me with an expression I knew well, the expression of a hunter who had caught the scent of his prey. She is lying, Hastings. About the murder. About something. The question is, what? He moved to the fire, warming his hands. Her accusation against Gerald is too convenient, too neatly packaged, and her alibi for the crucial hour, a headache, a tisane, a rest in her room, is almost impossible to verify. You think she's the killer? I think she knows more than she is telling. Poirot's eyes met mine, glittering in the firelight. But I do not yet have enough evidence to accuse anyone. We must dig deeper, Hastings. The secrets of Blackmore Hall have not yet yielded their final truth. Chapter 5. The Hour of Truth. The hour was late, well past 2 in the morning, when Poirot and I finally concluded our initial interviews. The household had been sent to their respective rooms with strict instructions not to communicate with one another, and a local constable summoned by telephone had taken up position in the entrance hall to ensure no one departed before the arrival of the police inspector from Exeter, expected at dawn. Yet Poirot showed no signs of fatigue. If anything, his energy seemed to increase as the night wore on, his little grey cells humming with the electricity of an unsolved puzzle. "We must return to the study, Hastings," he announced, rising from his chair by the library fire. "There is something I have missed, some detail that will unlock this mystery. I feel it here." He tapped his egg-shaped head with one immaculate finger. The study was cold now, the fire having died to grey ash. Lord Ashworth's body had been removed to a spare bedroom under Dr. Reeves's supervision, but the room remained otherwise undisturbed. The broken brandy glass had been carefully swept aside, and the stopped clock still stood sentinel on the mantelpiece, its hands frozen at 11. Poirot moved through the room with the focused intensity of a bloodhound on the scent. He examined the windows once more, tested the door's lock mechanism, peered behind curtains and beneath furniture. I watched in silence, knowing that interruption would only slow his process. "The door, Hastings," he murmured, crouching to examine the lock. "Observe the mechanism." I joined him, peering at the heavy brass lock. What am I looking for? The key was found in the lock on the inside. But see here. He pointed to faint scratches around the keyhole. These marks, fresh scratches made recently. Someone tampered with the lock or manipulated it from outside. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "There is a technique, Hastings, known to locksmiths and, regrettably, to criminals, whereby a key can be turned from the opposite side of a door using specialized tools. The key remains in the lock. The door appears locked from within, but the actual locking was performed from the corridor. So the locked room was an illusion, as I suspected. The killer murdered Lord Ashworth, arranged the scene, and then locked the door from the outside while leaving the key inside. The appearance of an impossible crime, when in fact it was merely clever staging. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold hearth. But that requires specialized knowledge. Who in this household would possess such skills? An excellent question, mon ami. One we must pursue. Poirot straightened and turned his attention to the desk. But first, the papers. I must examine them more thoroughly. He sorted through the documents with methodical precision. Financial statements, correspondence, legal documents. I watched his expression shift from focused attention to puzzlement to sudden sharp interest. "Hastings, come here." I crossed to his side. He held a letter, handwritten on expensive cream-colored paper. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. "What is it?" "A letter to Lord Ashworth from Diana, dated 3 weeks ago. Listen." Poirot began to read aloud. "My dearest Edmund, I write to you with a heart full of gratitude, and I confess, some trepidation. Your decision to change your will in favor of Philip and Margot means more than I can express. They will have the future I always dreamed for them, a future I feared would be impossible after Richard's death. But I must warn you, my darling, your children will not accept this quietly. Gerald, especially. I have seen the way he looks at me, the hatred barely concealed behind those cold eyes. He is dangerous, Edmund, more dangerous than you know. I have heard rumors of his associations, of debts owed to men who do not forgive. I fear for your safety, and yes, I fear for my own. Please take precautions. Lock your study when you work. Summon that detective you spoke of. Do whatever you must to ensure that you live to sign the new will. All my love, Diana. Poirot set the letter down carefully. Interesting, no. Diana warns Lord Ashworth of danger from Gerald. She urges him to summon a detective, me. She expresses fear for his safety and her own. It seems to support her accusation against Gerald, or it establishes a narrative, carefully constructed in advance. Poirot's voice was thoughtful. Consider, Hastings. If Diana planned to kill her husband, what better preparation than a letter warning of danger from another? If this letter were found after the murder, it would point suspicion directly at Gerald. But the new will wasn't signed. If Diana wanted Lord Ashworth dead, she needed him alive until midnight. Unless... Poirot trailed off, his eyes suddenly distant. He stood motionless for several seconds, then spun on his heel and strode to the mantelpiece. He seized the stopped clock, turning it over in his hands with feverish intensity. Poirot, what is it? The clock, Hastings. The clock. He opened the back panel, examining the mechanism within. Lord Ashworth wound this clock every morning without fail. It was his ritual, his obsession. And yet tonight, it stopped at precisely 11 o'clock. Someone stopped it deliberately. We've established that. But how was it stopped? Poirot's fingers probed the mechanism. A clock may be stopped by removing the key, by blocking the mechanism, by... He froze. Ah, voilà. What? What have you found? Poirot withdrew his fingers from the clock's interior. Pinched between his thumb and forefinger was a small scrap of paper, wedged between two gears. A piece of paper inserted into the mechanism. At a certain point in the clock's operation, this paper would jam the gears and stop the movement. The question is, at what time was it inserted, and when did it actually cause the clock to stop? I shook my head, confused. I don't understand. The clock stopped at 11. Isn't that when the paper jammed it? The clock shows 11, Hastings. But consider, if I insert a piece of paper into a clock at, say, 9 o'clock, it might not jam the gears immediately. It might take 1 hour, perhaps 2, for the mechanism to bring the paper into contact with the stopping point. The clock stops at 11, but the sabotage was performed earlier. So whoever stopped the clock did so well before 11, perhaps even before the murder itself. Précisément. Poirot's eyes blazed with triumph. And this tells us something crucial about the killer's plan. The stopped clock was not an afterthought. It was prepared in advance. The killer knew exactly when they would commit the murder and arranged for the clock to stop at a later time, creating the illusion that death occurred at 11, when in fact it happened much earlier. But why go to such trouble? Because of the will, Hastings. The will to be signed at midnight. Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Consider the sequence of events. Lord Ashworth is murdered around 10 o'clock, perhaps even earlier. The killer arranges the scene. The body slumped at the desk, the brandy glass positioned to fall, the clock set to stop at 11. They then lock the door from outside and wait. Wait for what? For the crash, for the discovery of the body. Poirot stopped pacing. Harrington heard a crash at 10 past 11, the brandy glass breaking. But Lord Ashworth was already dead. So how did the glass fall? I felt the solution hovering just beyond my grasp. A mechanism of some kind, a delayed trigger. Exactement, Poirot returned to the desk, examining the surface with renewed intensity. If I wished to create a delayed crash, how would I do it? The glass was positioned near the edge of the desk, by Lord Ashworth's hand. Something must have caused it to fall at the designated time. He pulled out drawers, examined the desk's construction, ran his fingers along every surface. Then, with a soft exclamation of satisfaction, he located something beneath the desk's lip. A small metal bracket, recently installed with traces of string still attached. A simple mechanism. The glass was balanced on a small platform, a piece of cardboard, perhaps, or thin wood. Supported by this bracket and a length of string, the string ran where? Poirot traced an imaginary line. To the clock, perhaps, or to another timer mechanism. He crossed to the fireplace, examining the mantel, the clock, the surrounding area. Behind the clock, nearly invisible against the dark wood, was a small hook. A fragment of string still clung to it. The string ran from the bracket to this hook, and from here, yes, I see it now. The string was attached to the clock's mechanism. When the clock stopped at 11, the sudden cessation of movement would have released tension in the string, allowing it to slacken. The platform supporting the glass would have shifted, and crash. The glass falls. Harrington hears it. The discovery is triggered. I stared at the evidence before us. The bracket, the hook, the fragments of string. But this is incredibly elaborate. Who could have constructed such a device? Someone with mechanical knowledge. Someone who had access to the study. Someone who knew Lord Ashworth's routine intimately. Poirot's voice was grim, and someone who needed to be elsewhere, with an unshakable alibi, when the crash occurred. Gerald was in his room. Diana was presumably in hers. Thomas was in the conservatory. Beatrice in her room. They all have alibis for 11 o'clock. And that is precisely the point, Hastings. The killer needed to be far from the study when the body was discovered. The elaborate mechanism ensured exactly that. Poirot fell silent, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. But there is still something I am missing. Some piece of this puzzle that does not fit. What piece? The motive, Hastings. We have assumed that the killer wished to prevent the signing of the new will. This benefits Gerald, Thomas, and Beatrice, not Diana. And yet the mechanism suggests planning, premeditation, a cold intelligence. Gerald is passionate, impulsive. Beatrice is direct. Thomas is ineffectual. None of them quite fit the profile of this crime. Then perhaps Diana found a way to benefit from the unsigned will? Perhaps. Poirot did not sound convinced. Or perhaps we have misunderstood the motive entirely. He turned back to the desk, rifling through the papers once more. His movements were quick, almost frantic. The movements of a man who sensed the truth hovering just out of reach. Then he stopped. His hand had closed around a small leather notebook, hidden beneath a stack of financial documents. He opened it, scanning the pages with increasing intensity. Hastings, his voice was barely a whisper. Come, read this. I crossed to his side. The notebook was Lord Ashworth's personal diary. Cramped handwriting recording dates, appointments, observations. Poirot had opened it to an entry dated 2 days prior. I have discovered Diana's secret. She believes herself clever, but Edmund Ashworth did not build a fortune by being blind. The investigator's report confirms everything. She married Richard Crane 6 months before his death, a man already dying of consumption, wealthy and childless. She inherited everything. And now she has done the same with me. Found a wealthy older man, insinuated herself into his life, arranged for a new will in her favor. But I will not be her second victim. I have written to Poirot, and I have made arrangements of my own. The midnight signing will proceed, but not as Diana expects. I looked up, my heart pounding. Lord Ashworth knew. He knew Diana was planning something. He suspected, at least. Poirot's face was grave, and he made arrangements of his own. But what arrangements? What did he intend to do at midnight? Perhaps the new will was a trap. Perhaps he planned to expose Diana publicly. Possible, but even probable. Poirot closed the diary, his expression troubled. But if Lord Ashworth intended to expose Diana at midnight, then she had every reason to ensure he did not live to see that hour. The unsigned will becomes irrelevant. What matters is silencing Lord Ashworth before he could reveal her secrets. Then Diana is the killer. Poirot shook his head slowly. The evidence points to her, yes. But something still troubles me, Hastings. The mechanism, the stopped clock, the delayed crash. It is too elaborate, too clever. Diana is intelligent, but this requires technical skill. And there is the matter of the locked door. How did she acquire the knowledge to lock it from outside? An accomplice. Perhaps. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps the true killer is someone else entirely. Someone we have overlooked. Someone invisible. He tucked the diary into his pocket and strode toward the door. Where are we going? To speak with the servants, Hastings. In my experience, the servants see everything, and everyone forgets that they do. Chapter 6. When the Clock Strikes. The servants' hall was a modest room in the basement of Blackmore Hall, furnished with a long wooden table, simple chairs, and the accumulated warmth of the kitchen ovens that adjoined it. At this late hour, the remaining staff had gathered there. Harrington the butler, Mrs. Finch the cook, Barnett the chauffeur, and 3 maids whose names I had not yet learned. They rose as we entered, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and the particular wariness that servants display when the household order has been disrupted. Please be seated, Poirot said, his voice gentle. I require only a few moments of your time and your honesty. He settled into a chair at the head of the table, surveying the assembled staff with his keen, bright eyes. I took up position by the door, notebook ready. I wish to speak about something that may seem trivial. Poirot began. The daily routines of this household. Who cleans Lord Ashworth's study? Who tends the fire there? Who has access to that room throughout the day? Mrs. Finch, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a no-nonsense expression, was the first to speak. The study is cleaned each morning by Daisy, sir. She lights the fire, dusts the surfaces, empties the ash. Lord Ashworth was particular about his privacy. No one else was permitted to enter, except by his direct invitation. And the clock on the mantelpiece. Who winds it? His lordship himself, sir. Every morning at 7 o'clock precisely. I've seen him do it 100 times when I bring his breakfast tray. He'd stroke that clock like it was a living thing. Mrs. Finch shook her head sadly. Said it was the only honest thing in the house. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Daisy. Which of you is Daisy? A young woman at the far end of the table raised her hand nervously. She was perhaps 20, with brown curls escaping from beneath her cap, and the reddened eyes of someone who had been weeping. You cleaned the study this morning. We? Yes, sir. Same as always. I went in at 6:30 before his lordship came down. Lit the fire, dusted the desk and mantel, swept the hearth. And the clock? Did you touch it? Daisy shook her head emphatically. Never, sir. His lordship was very clear about that. No one was to touch his clock but him. Did you notice anything unusual in the study this morning? Anything out of place? Anything different from the normal arrangement? Daisy's brow furrowed in concentration. I don't think so, sir. Everything was as it always is. The papers on the desk. The brandy decanter on the side table. She stopped, her eyes widening slightly. Yes? What is it? It's probably nothing, sir. But there was a small piece of string on the floor behind the desk. Just a short bit. Maybe 6 inches. I thought it odd, because his lordship was so particular about tidiness. But I swept it up with the rest and didn't think more of it. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. String. You are certain? Yes, sir. Thin string like you'd use for parcels. Daisy, this is most important. Was there anything else? Any other detail, however small, that struck you as unusual? The maid thought hard, clearly wanting to help. Only that the side table had been moved, sir, just a few inches. I noticed because there was a mark on the carpet where it usually stands. I pushed it back into place. The side table where the brandy decanter is kept? Yes, sir. Poirot sat back, a small smile playing about his lips. Merci, Daisy. You have been most helpful. He turned to address the group. Now, I must ask about last evening. Mr. Gerald Ashworth claims that Daisy brought him whiskey in his room at 10 o'clock. Is this true? All eyes turned to Daisy, who flushed crimson. Yes, sir. Mr. Gerald rang for a drink. I brought it to him straight away. And he was in his room when you arrived? Yes, sir. He was packing a bag. He seemed upset. Did you see anyone else in the corridor? Hear anything unusual? Daisy hesitated, a hesitation so brief that I almost missed it, but Poirot did not miss it. Daisy. His voice was soft but implacable. What did you see? The young maid's flush deepened to a painful scarlet. Her eyes darted to the other servants, then back to Poirot. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I saw Lady Ashworth, sir. The current Lady Ashworth. She was coming up the back stairs from the ground floor, the stairs near the study. A murmur ran through the assembled servants. Harrington's face tightened. What time was this? Just before 10, sir. Maybe 5 minutes before. I was on my way to Mr. Gerald's room with the whiskey. And Lady Ashworth, did she see you? No, sir. I stepped back into the shadows. I didn't want to. I mean, it's not my place to question where the mistress goes. Daisy's voice trembled. But she was carrying something, sir. Something in her hands. A small bag, like a lady's reticule, but heavier. And she looked frightened. Her face was white as chalk. Poirot absorbed this information in silence. Then, very gently, You did not mention this before. Why? Tears spilled down Daisy's cheeks. I was afraid, sir. Lady Ashworth has always been kind to me, and I didn't want to cause trouble. And Mr. Gerald... She stopped abruptly. Mr. Gerald, what? He asked me to say I saw nothing. He said it would only confuse matters. Daisy dissolved into sobs. I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. Poirot rose from his chair, his expression grave but not unkind. You have told the truth now, Daisy. That is what matters. He turned to Harrington. I should like to speak with you privately. The rest of you may retire, but no one is to leave the servants' hall until the police arrive. Harrington followed us to a small sitting room off the main corridor, his silver-haired dignity somewhat diminished by the events of the evening. His hands, I noticed, were no longer steady. Harrington, Poirot began without a preamble. You have served this family for 32 years. You know its secrets, all of them. It is time to share what you know. The butler's composure cracked. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking all of his 60 years. What do you wish to know, sir? The mechanism. The device that caused the brandy glass to fall. It required technical knowledge to construct. Who in this household possesses such skills? Harrington was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. There is only one person, sir. One person with the knowledge and the access. Who? Lady Ashworth's brother, sir, Mr. Vincent Crane. I straightened in surprise. Diana has a brother? We've heard nothing of him. He is not spoken of in polite company, sir. Mr. Vincent is troubled. He spent time in an institution some years ago, but he is also brilliant, an engineer, an inventor. Before his breakdown, he designed machinery for several manufacturing firms. And he is in this house? Harrington nodded miserably. He arrived 3 days ago, sir. Lady Ashworth arranged for him to stay in the groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the estate. She said he needed rest and fresh air. No one was to know he was here. Poirot's eyes blazed. Why did you not mention this before? Because I didn't think... Harrington stopped, his face ashen. My God, you think Mr. Vincent helped her? You think they planned this together? I think, Harrington, that we have finally found our missing piece. Poirot rose. Hastings, fetch your coat. We must visit this cottage immediately. The groundskeeper's cottage stood at the far edge of Blackmore Hall's grounds, half hidden by ancient oaks and shrouded in the persistent November fog. It was a small stone building, picturesque in daylight perhaps, but sinister in the pre-dawn darkness. Barnett drove us in the motor car, his face grim. He had armed himself with a heavy spanner, and I found myself grateful for my old service revolver, which I had taken to carrying since our earlier adventures. The cottage appeared dark and deserted as we approached. Poirot knocked firmly on the door. Mr. Vincent Crane, I am Hercule Poirot. I wish to speak with you. Silence. The fog swirled around us, carrying the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Poirot tried the door. It swung open, unlocked. Inside, the cottage was a single room, sparsely furnished. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, a small stove. A lamp burned low on the table, casting flickering shadows. And seated in one of the chairs, perfectly still, was a man. He was perhaps 40, thin to the point of gauntness, with the same grey eyes as Diana. His hands rested on the table before him, and those hands, I noticed immediately, were stained with oil and marked with small cuts and burns, the hands of a man who worked with machinery. Mr. Crane, Poirot said calmly, as though finding suspects waiting in darkened cottages were an everyday occurrence. I believe you have been expecting us. Vincent Crane smiled, a thin, bitter smile that did not reach his eyes. I have been expecting someone, yes. The police, I assumed. But Hercule Poirot himself. Diana said you were coming. She was quite frightened of you, you know. And are you frightened, Mr. Crane? No. Vincent's voice was eerily calm. I am relieved. The waiting is the hardest part. Now that it's over, I feel almost at peace. Poirot took the chair opposite him, leaving me to stand guard by the door. You constructed the mechanism, the string, the bracket, the timing device. You arranged for the clock to stop at 11 and trigger the crash. I did. Quite elegant, don't you think? The hardest part was calibrating the paper in the clock. It had to stop at precisely the right moment. Too early, and the body would be discovered before Gerald had time to establish his alibi. Too late, and Diana's absence from her room might be noticed. And the locked door? A simple lock-picking technique. Diana learned it from me years ago. I taught her when we were children, playing at being burglars. Vincent's smile faded. She always was the clever one. I merely provided the technical expertise. You know that your confession implicates your sister in murder. My sister is already implicated, Monsieur Poirot. The diary, the letter, the physical evidence. You have enough to convict her without my help. Vincent leaned forward, his grey eyes suddenly intense. But there is something you don't know, something Diana herself doesn't know. And what is that? Vincent Crane drew a breath. Lord Ashworth did not die from the poison in the brandy. Oh, Diana poisoned him, certainly. She added cyanide to his evening drink, just as she planned. But when I went to the study to set up the mechanism, I found him already dead. The silence in the cottage was absolute. Already dead? Poirot repeated softly. You are saying someone else killed him first. I am saying that when I arrived at 9:30, after Gerald had left from his argument, Lord Ashworth was slumped at his desk with a knife wound in his back. Dead. Murdered. And the clock on the mantelpiece was still running, showing 9:30 exactly. Poirot sat perfectly still, his little grey cells processing this revelation. And yet you proceeded with your mechanism? You staged the scene as planned. What else was I to do? Vincent's voice cracked for the first time. Diana had already poisoned the brandy. If the body were discovered with a knife in his back and poison in his glass, she would be arrested immediately. So I removed the knife. I arranged the body. I set up the mechanism to make it appear that he had died later, from the poison alone. I was trying to protect her. You were trying to conceal the true killer. I was trying to save my sister. Vincent's composure shattered. She's all I have, Monsieur Poirot. Our parents are dead. I have no wife, no children. Diana took care of me when I was ill, paid for my treatment, gave me a reason to live. I would do anything for her, even this. Poirot rose slowly from his chair. The knife, Mr. Crane. Where is it now? Vincent reached into his coat and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He laid it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a letter opener, silver-handled, ornate, stained dark with dried blood. I took it from his back. I cleaned the wound as best I could. It was small, easily hidden by his coat. Then I set up the mechanism and left. Vincent's voice was hollow. I thought I was saving Diana, but all I did was help the real killer escape. Poirot took the letter opener, examining it with care. His expression was unreadable. Mr. Crane, I must ask you one final question. The letter opener. Do you recognize it? Vincent nodded slowly. Yes, it belongs to Gerald Ashworth. It was a gift from his father, years ago. His initials are engraved on the handle. G.A. Poirot turned the handle toward the lamp. There, clearly visible, were two elegant letters. G.A. Gerald Ashworth. I breathed. He killed his own father. So it would appear, Hastings. Poirot wrapped the letter opener carefully in its cloth. But appearances, as we have learned tonight, can be most deceiving. Come, we must return to the hall. The final act of this drama is about to begin. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. Dawn had begun to break over Blackmore Hall when we returned from the groundskeeper's cottage, the fog slowly lifting to reveal a pale grey sky streaked with the first hints of rose and gold. Vincent Crane walked between us, unresisting, his confession hanging in the air like the dissipating mist. Poirot had sent Barnett ahead to gather the household in the drawing room. As we entered the great hall, I could hear the murmur of confused voices, the rustle of hastily donned clothing, the tension of people summoned from their beds to face an unknown reckoning. The drawing room of Blackmore Hall was a grand space, high ceilings painted with pastoral scenes, tall windows now admitting the grey morning light, and furniture arranged in conversational groupings around a massive marble fireplace. A fire had been lit against the morning chill, and before it stood Poirot, small and immaculate, surveying the assembled company with the calm authority of a conductor about to lead an orchestra. They were all there. Diana Ashworth sat rigid in a wing-back chair, her porcelain composure cracked now, her grey eyes darting between her brother, who stood pale and silent by the door, and Poirot. Gerald stood by the window, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of defiance and fear. Beatrice had taken a seat on the settee beside her mother, the first Lady Ashworth, whose face was drawn with exhaustion and grief. Thomas sat apart from the others, his spectacles askew, looking utterly bewildered by the proceedings. Dr. Reeves stood near the fireplace, medical bag at his feet, while Mr. Pemberton, the solicitor, had positioned himself near the door, legal pad in hand, as though preparing to take notes on the proceedings. Harrington the butler stood at attention by the far wall, and several of the household servants, including the trembling Daisy, hovered in the corridor beyond. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmur of confusion. I have gathered you here to reveal the truth of Lord Ashworth's death. It is a truth more complex than any of you imagine. A web of deception, betrayal, and murder most intricate. Get on with it, then, Gerald snapped. If you're going to accuse me, do it. I'm tired of this theatrical nonsense. Patience, Mr. Ashworth. Hercule Poirot does not rush to judgment. The little grey cells, they require precision. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace before the fireplace. Let us begin with what we know. Lord Edmund Ashworth summoned me to Blackmore Hall because he feared for his life. He was to sign a new will at midnight, a will that would disinherit his 3 children and leave his entire fortune to his current wife, Diana, and her children from her previous marriage. This created motive for many in this room. Gerald, Thomas, and Beatrice would lose everything. The first Lady Ashworth would see her children cast into poverty. Even the servants, whose positions depended on family favour, had reason to prefer the old order. We've established motive, Beatrice said impatiently. What of opportunity? The door was locked from inside. How could anyone have killed father? An excellent question, mademoiselle, and one I shall address. But first, the matter of timing. Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes sweeping the room. Lord Ashworth was found dead at 11:10 in the evening. The clock in his study had stopped at precisely 11 o'clock. Dr. Reeves estimated that he had been dead for at least an hour, meaning death occurred around 10 o'clock or earlier. And yet Gerald was heard arguing with his father until 9:45, and claims his father was alive when he departed. He was alive, Gerald insisted. I left him sitting at his desk, very much breathing. Indeed, so we must conclude that Lord Ashworth died between 9:45 and 10 o'clock, a window of approximately 15 minutes. Poirot paused. Or so it appeared. Diana leaned forward, her voice sharp. What do you mean, appeared? I mean, madame, that the entire scene was staged. The locked door, the stopped clock, the crash that drew the household's attention. All of it was theatre, designed to mislead. Poirot's gaze fixed on Vincent Crane. Your brother has confessed to constructing an elaborate mechanism, a system of strings and triggers that caused the brandy glass to fall at 11 o'clock, creating the crash that Harrington heard. He also manipulated the study clock to stop at that precise moment, and locked the door from outside while leaving the key inside. A gasp ran through the room. All eyes turned to Vincent, who stood pale and silent. But here is where the mystery deepens. Poirot continued. Mr. Crane constructed this mechanism to protect you, Madame Ashworth, because you had already attempted to murder your husband. Diana's face went white. That's a lie. Is it? You poisoned the brandy decanter in Lord Ashworth's study. Cyanide, introduced during your 20-minute absence from dinner at 8:45. You knew your husband took a glass of brandy every evening before bed. You expected him to drink it and die, apparently of natural causes or suicide. The unsigned new will would have been contested. You had evidence of Lord Ashworth's intent that you planned to produce in court. And with your husband dead, you would have been free to claim your widow's portion and fight for the rest. This is preposterous. But something went wrong, did it not? Poirot's voice hardened. When your brother went to the study at 9:30 to set up his mechanism, a mechanism you had planned together, to ensure an alibi for the time of death, he found Lord Ashworth already dead. Not from poison, but from a knife wound in his back. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Stabbed. The First Lady Ashworth's voice was barely a whisper. Edmund was stabbed. Oui, madame. Stabbed with this. Poirot withdrew the wrapped letter opener from his coat and laid it on the mantelpiece. A silver letter opener, engraved with the initials G.A. Gerald Ashworth's letter opener, a gift from his father. All eyes turned to Gerald, whose face had gone grey. No, he breathed. No, I never... The evidence is damning, Mr. Ashworth. You argued violently with your father. You were the last person known to see him alive, and the murder weapon bears your initials. Poirot paused. Many would consider this case closed. But you don't. Beatrice's voice was quiet, thoughtful. You said the scene was staged. If Gerald killed father, why would Vincent Crane cover it up? Why protect the man who committed the murder that Diana was planning to commit herself? Précisément, mademoiselle. You have touched upon the heart of the mystery. Poirot resumed his pacing. Vincent Crane removed the knife and staged the scene because he believed he was protecting his sister. He assumed that Diana's poison had somehow failed, and that someone else had killed Lord Ashworth first. He did not know who, he did not care. His only concern was ensuring that Diana would not be connected to the death. So who did kill him? Thomas asked, his voice trembling. Consider the facts. Poirot's voice took on a rhythmic quality, the cadence of a man assembling a puzzle piece by piece. Lord Ashworth was stabbed at approximately 9:30 during or shortly after his argument with Gerald. The murder weapon was Gerald's letter opener. Gerald had motive, the inheritance, and opportunity. He was alone with his father. The case against him seems overwhelming. Because it is. Diana's voice rose. He killed Edmund. He killed my husband. Non, madame. Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. Gerald Ashworth did not kill his father. He was meant to appear as the killer, meant to take the blame for a crime he did not commit. The letter opener was stolen from his room and planted in Lord Ashworth's back. The argument was deliberately provoked to establish motive. Gerald Ashworth was framed. Framed. Gerald stepped forward, his face a mixture of hope and confusion. By whom? Poirot turned to face the room, his eyes moving from face to face. I asked myself, who benefits from Lord Ashworth's death before the will is signed? The obvious answer is the first family, Gerald, Thomas, Beatrice. But if Gerald is convicted of murder, he cannot inherit. The title and estate would pass to Thomas, and the fortune would be divided between Thomas and Beatrice alone. Thomas went pale. You can't possibly think, I think, Mr. Ashworth, that you have played a very deep game. Poirot's gaze fixed on the younger son. You told me you lacked courage, that you were ineffectual, useless. But this was a mask, was it not? A mask you have worn for years, allowing everyone to underestimate you. This is absurd. Is it? You have a first-class mind, Mr. Ashworth. Educated at Cambridge, fluent in French, well-read in philosophy and literature. You told me you were reading Baudelaire in the conservatory at the time of the murder. But Baudelaire was also a master of deception and hidden meanings. Was he not? Le Masque, The Mask, is one of his most famous poems. A meditation on the face we show the world versus the truth hidden beneath. Thomas said nothing, but I saw his hands clench at his sides. You knew about Diana's plan to poison your father. You learned of it somehow, perhaps through the servants, perhaps through your own observations. And you saw an opportunity. If your father died from poison, suspicion would fall on Diana. But if he died from a stab wound inflicted with Gerald's letter opener, suspicion would fall on Gerald instead. Either way, your two greatest obstacles would be removed. You're constructing fantasies. Am I? Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather notebook. This is your father's diary. In it, he writes of discovering Diana's secret, her previous marriage to a dying man, her pattern of predatory behavior. But he also writes something else, something I found most illuminating. Poirot opened the diary and read aloud. Thomas watches everything with those quiet eyes. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He listens at doors, reads letters not meant for him, observes and catalogues. My younger son is not the fool he pretends to be. I wonder sometimes what schemes are hatching behind that mild facade. Thomas's composure cracked. A flicker of something. Fear? Rage? Crossed his face before he mastered it. Your father saw through your mask, Mr. Ashworth. He knew you were dangerous, and that knowledge, I believe, signed his death warrant. You have no proof, Thomas said quietly. No evidence, only speculation and a dead man's suspicions. On the contrary, I have evidence most compelling. Poirot withdrew a second item from his pocket. A small glass vial, empty. This vial was found in the groundskeeper's cottage, hidden beneath the floorboards. Vincent Crane did not put it there. He did not know of its existence until I showed it to him an hour ago. But someone visited that cottage before Vincent arrived. Someone who knew of its existence and used it as a hiding place. What is it? A vial that once contained morphine, a sedative commonly used in medical practice. Poirot turned to Dr. Reeves. You mentioned that Lord Ashworth had been complaining of chest pains. You prescribed him medication, did you not? Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. A mild sedative to help him sleep, but I kept it in my medical bag. I administered it myself each evening. And your medical bag, where was it during dinner? The doctor's face went pale. In my room, unattended. Thomas. Poirot's voice was soft now, almost gentle. You stole the morphine from Dr. Reeves's bag. You dissolved it in the coffee served to your father before dinner. enough to make him drowsy, confused, slower to react. When Gerald went to argue with him, your father was already compromised. His reflexes dulled, his awareness diminished. And when Gerald left at 9:45, you were waiting. No. You entered through the connecting door. The words fell into silence. Everyone turned to stare at the wall behind Lord Ashworth's desk, a wall that I now realized connected to an adjacent room. The study was not always a study, Poirot continued. Once it was part of a larger suite connected to what is now a storage room by a door hidden behind the oak paneling. This door has been sealed for decades. But you found it, Thomas. You found it during your childhood explorations of this old house, and you remembered. Poirot crossed to the wall and pressed a section of paneling. With a soft click, a hidden door swung open, revealing a dark passage beyond. You entered through this door, approached your drowsy father from behind, and stabbed him with Gerald's letter opener, stolen from his room earlier that day. You then locked the study door from inside, exited through the hidden passage, and returned to the conservatory to establish your alibi. Poirot paused. You did not know that Diana had already poisoned the brandy. You did not know that Vincent Crane would arrive to stage the scene. These complications nearly derailed your perfect crime, but in the end, they only added to the confusion. Thomas stood motionless, his face a mask of perfect calm. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, a smile spread across his features, a smile utterly unlike the mild, self-deprecating expression he had worn before. This smile was cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. Bravo, Monsieur Poirot. His voice had changed too, harder, more confident. I wondered if anyone would ever see through the act. Father came close, but he was too arrogant to believe his useless younger son could be a threat. Gerald was too busy resenting him. Beatrice was too busy managing him. And Diana, he laughed softly. Diana was so focused on her own schemes that she never noticed mine. Thomas! His mother's voice was anguished. Thomas, what are you saying? I'm saying what everyone in this family has always known but refused to admit. Mother. Father was a monster. He controlled us, manipulated us, pitted us against each other for his own amusement. Gerald spent his whole life trying to earn approval that would never come. Beatrice sacrificed everything to be his perfect hostess. And I, Thomas's voice cracked for the first time, I was invisible, the spare heir, the useless one, the poet. He turned to face the room, his grey eyes burning. Do you know what it's like to be invisible in your own family? To watch your father lavish attention on your brother's failures while ignoring your successes? To know that no matter what you achieve, you will never matter? So you killed him? Beatrice whispered. You murdered our father because he didn't pay enough attention to you. I killed him because it was the only way any of us would ever be free. Thomas's composure shattered completely. Gerald would have spent his whole life chasing father's approval. You would have spent yours managing his household. And I would have rotted in that shipping office until I died. Father's death set us all free. Can't you see that? And Diana? Poirot asked quietly. You were content to let her hang for your crime? Thomas shrugged. She was planning to murder him herself. The poison in the brandy. Do you think I didn't know? I watched her at it during her headache break from dinner. I could have stopped her, but why bother? If my plan failed, her poison would have finished the job. And if her poison was discovered, she would take the blame. And Gerald, you are willing to see your own brother convicted of murder? Gerald. Thomas's voice dripped contempt. Gerald, who got everything I ever wanted simply by being born first. The title, the estate, father's attention. Let him rot in prison. It would have been poetic justice. Thomas. The first Lady Ashworth rose from the settee, her face streaming with tears. Thomas, you are my son, my child. How could you, your child? Thomas laughed. A harsh, broken sound. When did you ever see me as your child, mother? You were always too busy worrying about Gerald, managing Beatrice, mourning your divorce. I was wallpaper. Background. Nobody. He stopped, his chest heaving, his mask of calm completely destroyed. In its place was something raw and wounded, the pain of a lifetime of invisibility, twisted into something monstrous. Poirot stepped forward, his voice surprisingly gentle. Thomas Ashworth, you will be taken into custody and charged with the murder of your father. But I wish you to know, the little grey cells, they do not judge. They only observe. And what I have observed is a tragedy. A family so broken by pride and cruelty that its members could not see each other's pain. Lord Ashworth created this darkness. You allowed it to consume you. Thomas met Poirot's eyes. For a moment, the rage and pain faded, replaced by something that might have been gratitude, or perhaps simply exhaustion. At least someone finally saw me, he whispered. The police arrived from Exeter within the hour. Thomas went quietly, his brief flame of defiance extinguished. Diana was also taken into custody. Her attempted poisoning, though unsuccessful, was still a crime. Vincent Crane would face charges as an accessory after the fact, though Poirot promised to speak on his behalf regarding his mental state and his misguided attempt to protect his sister. Gerald, Beatrice, and their mother were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered family. The old will would stand. Gerald would inherit the hall and the title, the fortune divided among the 3 surviving children. But the cost of that inheritance would haunt them all. As our motor car pulled away from Blackmore Hall, the morning sun finally breaking through the fog, I turned to Poirot. A terrible business, I said. All those schemes and counter-schemes, and in the end, a young man's wounded pride was the deadliest weapon of all. We, Hastings. Poirot's voice was heavy with weariness. Lord Ashworth built his fortune on ruthlessness and control. He applied those same principles to his family, and in doing so, created the instrument of his own destruction. Thomas was not born a monster. He was made one, slowly, over years of neglect and dismissal. Does that excuse what he did? No, nothing excuses murder, but it explains it. An explanation, mon ami, is the first step toward preventing such tragedies in future. Poirot gazed out the window at the receding bulk of Blackmore Hall. There is no greater crime than to kill for silence. But there is also no greater tragedy than a child made invisible by those who should have loved him. I had no answer to that. The motor car carried us back toward Exeter, and behind us, Blackmore Hall disappeared into the lifting fog, a monument to wealth, pride, and the terrible price of neglect. The final hour, Poirot murmured, almost to himself. Lord Ashworth thought it referred to the midnight signing of his will. But in truth, his final hour struck long ago, the moment he chose control over love, pride over compassion. The clock, Hastings. It merely confirmed what was already written. He fell silent, and we drove on through the brightening morning, leaving the shadows of Blackmore Hall behind us. But the shadows I knew would not be so easily escaped by those who remained. And so concludes our tale of The Final Hour, a story of inheritance, invisibility, and the deadly consequences of a family's dysfunction. Hercule Poirot unraveled the threads of 3 separate schemes: Diana's poison, Vincent's staging, and Thomas's long-nursed revenge, to find the truth hidden beneath layers of deception. The clock at Blackmore Hall has been reset, but its chimes will forever echo with the memory of Lord Ashworth's final hour. Thank you for joining us at Agatha Christie Tales. Until next time, may your own mysteries be solved with wisdom, compassion, and the tireless work of the little grey cells. Bonne nuit.